Hello and welcome back to The Rationalist. Thanks for coming to see our third version of this YouTube channel. We appreciate it. I also appreciate the comments that you've been giving me. And one of them was that they liked me discussing some of the comments that came in regards to the previous edition. So that's something I hope to keep up. Pretty much all the comments from last week were positive ones, so not much more to go into there. But we do plan on doing that, so very important to me. If you're nice enough to watch this whole video and you have some thoughts on it, under the video there's a comment section. If you could post your comments there, happy to discuss them in the next edition. Okay? Thanks. Now, on to this week. We want to talk about energy and the problems with it in terms of how it pollutes the environment. So, let's start with just a few basics, things that most people know, and then we'll go into some new stuff and maybe some hopeful solutions. When I think of the first energy source ever invented, I picture in my mind a caveman setting a fire in a cave. And I think that probably was our first use of energy. And it was a great use at that time. It gave warmth, it gave cooking ability, it gave light, it also gave smoke, which is of course a problem. I remember sitting around a lot of campfires where we'd say smoke follows beauty. I didn't get much smoke in my eyes, not sure why. Anyway, it was a great source of energy back in caveman days and later when there was a small population on the world and you weren't really doing much damage to the environment. Today, everybody knows that burning wood is not such a great thing. It puts a lot of emissions in the air, and so some places have even outlawed that. The good thing about wood, as we know, is we use it for many purposes, including building, and it's completely renewable. So, great, but it has a problem. What I want to note here is the problem from wood only comes from burning it. That's how we create the energy from it. So hold on to that thought for a second. The next form of energy we probably, if you want to call it invented, is water. And two sources there. The first was using water from a river to push a wheel to operate a mill for flour, grain, these type of things. And then the second, of course, which came much later, was hydroelectric power from dams and turbines. These are fabulous uses, fabulous ways to get energy because it's completely non-polluting, completely renewable. The heavens give us the rain that comes down and it just keeps coming. So wonderful. But the obvious problem with it is it's extremely limited in what we can do with it. We have far too much energy need to only use hydroelectric power. So fabulous form of energy, but very limited in what we can do with it. The other renewable that we have right now that's so good is solar. And everybody knows solar is, again, non-polluting and completely renewable. But the problems with it, which are obvious, are that the sun doesn't shine at night, so you don't have 24 hours a day of production. The other thing is there are a lot of environments where it's just not feasible to use it because there's not enough sunshine, whether we're talking about Alaska or a lot of other places in the world, you just can't do it. So water power, solar power, maybe to a smaller extent geothermal, these are things that we can use on a regular basis, but they are never going to provide 100% of our energy needs. Just not going to happen. So, okay, what do we do from there? Well, we go on to the next thing, which was coal. And coal has a lot of power in it, a lot of energy in it. Obviously, we know what the problems are with it is that, again, we get its power from burning it. And that's where the problem is in burning it, because it does tremendously bad things for our environment. We truly need to stop with coal very quickly. And I'm going to come back to this in a little bit, but just remember that coal has a lot of power within it. It's just that we have to burn it to release it. Then we come to gasoline. And we think of this typically when we put in cars, but remember we put it in ships, we put it in planes, we put it in lots of things. it has the same problems with the emissions. And so we want to get away from that as much as we can and use electric as much as we can. A couple of thoughts here for you. You may not know the electric engine was invented before the internal combustion engine. The reason it didn't catch on as well and why we use internal combustion engines in our cars and vehicles these days more readily is because of the problem with batteries. And we're doing much, much better on batteries now, but that's a significant problem. So the electric engine did catch on for like house appliances, these type of things. There it's great. If you can plug into a socket, an electric engine makes a lot of sense. If you can't plug into a socket and keep it plugged in, that's where you have your difficulties, and it's primarily with batteries. By the way, did you know the first electric engine was invented by an American? Did you know the first internal combustion engine was invented by an American? Yep, it's always us leading. I'll give credit to Daimler and Benz in Germany who really perfected the engine, but American ingenuity, we just keep doing it. Yahoo! Anyway, I think you're going to see a lot of things like lawnmowers make perfect sense to use electric engines. You can't plug them in, so right now everybody uses gas in them, but that's a thing where most people mow their lawn as opposed to having a service do it. And you know, for the amount of time it takes you to do it, an electric charge will be fine, and then you plug it in until the next time you use it. Great application. Cars are a little bit different. Right now, if you want to have 3 vehicles, if you're wealthy enough you can afford 3 vehicles, then one of them should certainly be electric. Because if I'm going to run my errands for the day to the grocery store and wherever, I'm probably putting 40, 50 miles on the car. And, you know, easy enough to recharge it after that. Maybe on a big day I'm putting 150 miles on it. But again, charge ranges are 300 miles or somewhere around there now. So that's a great use of a vehicle. They do cost more, and so that's a potential problem, but I think that's a problem we'll beat fairly easily. The gap between them keeps coming down. But what if I want to travel across the country, or I want to take a trip that's more than 300 miles? I've got to be able to recharge my car at the same rate I can do if I pull up to a gas station and put gas in the car. It takes me 3 or 4 minutes to fill my tank and I'm off again. You can't do that with an electric vehicle. That's a problem. So we shouldn't think that it's the complete answer, but we're working that way. So that's good. Let me point out here a couple things. Wood, coal, gas. How do we get the energy from them? We burn them. Anytime you burn something, you have emissions, and in most cases, natural gas is much better. But in most cases, that's what causes the problem, and global warming, heating, etc., all these type of things. So suppose that we did more research on things like coal. We have a tremendous amount of coal in this country. And suppose that we could continue to use it, but without burning it. Suppose that we turned our chemists loose on it and said, how do we harness the energy that is within coal without burning it? If we could get to that, coal would be a fabulous form of energy because we have so much of it. And that's where I think a lot of our research needs to go. All right? Chemical. And so that leads me to fuel cells. Fuel cells where you're not burning anything. And I think long-term, vehicles will eventually run on fuel cells as opposed to electricity, or fuel cells to create electricity, which powers an electric engine, because it's just so much better. Suppose you pull up to a gas station and you fill your tank, but now you're filling it with water. How much would that cost you? Almost nothing. And it would be the same speed as filling it up right now, but you could do it at home with a garden hose. And then the fuel cell breaks it down into hydrogen and oxygen. It uses the hydrogen to create power, and oxygen comes out the tailpipe. That's just one version. You can use other chemicals to create fuel cells also, but I think there's real future in this. So I think fuel cell is the way we should be doing a lot more research, the way we should be looking in the future. So a couple of thoughts there. The most recent form of energy we've developed, relatively speaking, is we've learned to harness the power of the atom. Fabulous power. Little bitty atoms, huge amounts of power. So that's a wonderful thing, as long as you're not making nuclear bombs. But the obvious problem here is radioactivity. It gives off radioactivity that the fuel rods and the water and the other parts of nuclear reactors become tremendously radioactive, and they will be for 10,000 years. 10,000 years. That's longer than the recorded history of mankind. That's just incredible. So if somebody is an environmentalist and they say, we need more nuclear power, I say, you're not an environmentalist. Do you think humans, imperfect as we are, can guarantee you that these properties that have become radioactive, that we can guarantee you they won't leach into the environment for 10,000 years? Not going to happen. Ever hear of Chernobyl? Yeah, accidents will happen. We've been trying for many years to build a nuclear repository out in Nevada for these radioactive materials, and it hasn't happened yet. And there are a couple of reasons for that, but the primary one is people who live in Nevada don't want it in their state. Can you blame them? Would you want to live next to this? I wouldn't. NIMBY, not in my backyard. You can't guarantee the safety of something for 10,000 years. Earthquakes, fault lines, just all sorts of problems that can end up releasing this. So to think that mankind can do that is very unrealistic, and I think it's incredibly irresponsible to be having nuclear reactors producing this kind of waste that we cannot really control. Now, that's fission, okay? Fission is splitting the atom. Fusion is putting atoms together. Fusion, depending on some other variables, has radioactivity that lasts afterwards for approximately 100 years, maybe a little bit more. Now, I feel a lot safer saying for 100 years we're going to protect the environment from this radioactivity. That, I think, we can do with a reasonable chance. So I'm not against nuclear power. I am against nuclear fission. We need to get to fusion. Now, it's obviously difficult. Maybe you don't know, the sun and the inner core is fusion, is the energy source, and on the outside is fission. And so it's something that goes on from every star. So it's not exactly new, but harnessing the power of it, that's another matter. It's difficult, but we're doing research with it, and I think we'll get there someday. I think that's a huge source of future power. So now let's talk for a minute about research in this country. We do research a number of ways. Private industry obviously does a fair amount of it. Private industry research funded by the government is some of it. And what I think is best of all is research universities that do research on all sorts of things with grants from the government. So you're a professor at a research university or a graduate student, and you write up a grant proposal, and if the federal government approves it, then they give money to the university to follow that up. And if you're in a STEM field, it probably pays for a graduate student's education. They may still have to pay for room and board, but the education part is taken care of. And maybe they have to be a teaching assistant or something like that, but that's fine, that's great. I think that's a wonderful model of how to do research, in addition to private industry. So what I'm proposing is we need to research many things, but let's research at a much higher rate fuel cells and fusion and coal not burning, but finding chemical ways to take the power from coal. I don't think we're doing much to look into that, and I really think we should. We have a great research model in this country. Let's continue it, but let's refine it. Let's put it into these type of things. I think that's where the future lies. So, one other thing, here's a reason why we need to stop using coal faster than many people think we can. We talk about going to electric engines, and again, there's a intermediate term future for doing that with batteries. But now let's talk about ships, big ships that ply the ocean. Let's suppose that you're going to go across the Pacific Ocean. You're going to take a 3-week trip on a freighter. And so you're out and you're using electric batteries for power, and 3 days out you run out. Where do you recharge? You're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You can't do it. Plus, moving a boat through water is a lot more difficult than moving something on land. You have a lot more friction, a lot more inertia. You need a lot more power. So the relative power to push a boat versus pushing a vehicle on land, it's a lot more for that boat. Same thing for airlines. You might be able to do small, private planes with electric engines, but you can't do it for big commercial planes. The batteries weigh too much, and you can't recharge them fast enough to make good use of the plane. My point being, planes and ships produce a large amount, I've read up to 25% of global emissions. That's a huge amount. And my point is, they're not going away tomorrow. You're not going to be able to say, go to electric engines for these. Doesn't work. You might be able to when we get to fuel cells. But my point is, because we can't eliminate using fuel, gasoline, petroleum for big planes and ships, we need to be working on other things very rapidly. So that's another reason to get rid of coal, because of its terrible emissions, and we need to do it rapidly. So some thoughts on research and where we might go with these. One other thing, when you talk about the emissions that we're putting out, a few years back we had the Paris Accords, which was a way for most of the countries of the world to come together and say we'll reduce emissions by these levels, and we're trying to do good things for the environment. When Donald Trump became president, he pulled us out of the Paris Accords. This might surprise you, but I'm glad he did. I don't really know what reasons he did it for, but I'm thinking for different reasons. First off, the Paris Accords said, okay, America, you have to reduce your emissions by this much. China and India and places like that, you have to reduce them by this much. A much lower percentage. Why? That's not fair. And people will tell you, well, it's more difficult for them because they're as developed as us. Hogwash. It should be fair. If we have to reduce our emissions by a certain amount, then everybody else should too. Don't make it unrealistic for any one country, or what will happen? They'll drop out. Second part is, there were no teeth to this. It was all voluntary. People think the Paris Accords were a great thing. They weren't. It was all voluntary. If you didn't meet your target, so what? No big deal. Nobody could hold you to it. So they were worthless. They were a feel-good, slap-on-the-back thing for politicians saying, look what we did, and they had almost zero value. So I'm glad we pulled out for a different reason, so we can start anew. We need environmental rules. We need to do this on a global scale. But the Paris Accords were a hoax. We need something real, and I'm hoping now we can start on putting that together. So, those are some thoughts from me today on energy and the emissions that they put out. I really want to see your comments. If you have thoughts on new technologies that I don't know about, share them with me. Let's share them with everybody. We want to do that. Please do me a favor and like this, and subscribe if you can. Put it on Facebook, link to this if you would. That would be wonderful. Keep watching. Keep sending me your ideas. I'm a rationalist. I'm optimistic about America, and I want you to help me. Thanks for everything.